There are some stories you can outgrow. You can outgrow the monster under the bed. You can outgrow the haunted school bathroom. The cousin who swore the old mango tree had something living in it. The auntie who lowered her voice every time she said the word Jinn, as if saying it too clearly might count as an invitation. You can laugh at those stories later. You can become educated, modern, reasonable, the kind of person who says things like, well, obviously that was sleep paralysis, while still refusing to sleep with your foot outside the blanket. But then there are other stories that don't really disappear. They just move deeper into the house. The Jinn are one of those stories, and I mean story in the oldest sense of the word. It might seem like something that exists because someone made it up around a fire to keep children from wandering into a well. But I mean story as a way reality has been remembered, organized, feared, and interpreted across centuries. In Islam, the Jinn are not a decorative piece of folklore. In Islam, the Jinn are absolutely not a decorative piece of folklore that sits besides theology. They are in the Qur'an. They hear revelation. They believe and disbelieve. They are addressed alongside human beings. They're made from fire. They're morally accountable. Iblis, or Satan himself, is described as being from among the Jinn. There's also an entire surah or chapter in the Qur'an named after them. I think that should immediately make us slow down, because modern pop culture has done something very weird to the Jinn. It took a serious category of unseen beings and split it into two cartoons. On one side, the genie, blue, theatrical, wish-granting, Robin Williams, basically some kind of spiritual customer care rep with theater kid energy. On the other side, the horror Jinn, smoky, crawling, angry, usually living in a wall because apparently every supernatural being in cinema has some kind of real estate drama. Neither one really captures the gravity of the subject. The Islamic picture is stranger and more disciplined, and honestly, more frightening, because it isn't chaos, it's order. The Jinn are not outside the structure of creation. They're very much inside it. They aren't some kind of rivals to God. They're simply his creatures. They have no ownership of the unseen. They're simply part of it. And their existence does not free human beings from responsibility. If anything, they make the moral world feel more crowded. So tonight, for the last video in this Hidden Beings series, I'm going to try to go into the Jinn. As popular as it would be, not as a cheap scare or a TikTok exorcism rabbit hole. Not as my cousin's friend's neighbor saw a 7-foot bride in an abandoned plot in Karachi. Although, honestly, I would listen to that story immediately. I'll try to go in as carefully as I can, incorporating Qur'an, hadith, folklore, and psychology, with some old stories from Muslim homes. And if my idiocy offends anyone, well, it's in the name of the podcast, so sorry. And of course, I'll be asking the question that's kind of been haunting this whole series. What does it mean to live in a world where unseen intelligence is not an exception, but part of the structure of everyday reality? Welcome back to Idiot Mystic. Tonight, we're talking about the fire behind the wall. Let's start with the word itself, Jinn. Most English speakers say it like Jinn. Sometimes you see it spelled D-J-I-N-N with a D at the beginning, mostly because of French transliteration and later English usage. The singular is often genie, meaning one individual member of that order. Genie comes out of the same tangled translation history, but by the time you get to the English word genie, you are already very, very far from the Qur'anic word and dangerously close to someone rubbing a lamp like a metaphysical vending machine. And before the Islamic scholars show up and tear me up, I understand that that's not what I'm doing. I'm just sharing what I found out about Jinn. So relax. The Arabic root is important. Jim, noon. It carries the sense of concealment, hiddenness, and being covered from sight. You can hear echoes of it in related Arabic words. Jannah, the garden, is connected to the idea of being covered or lushly hidden. Janin, a fetus, is hidden in the womb. Majnun, often translated as mad or possessed, literally carries the sense of someone whose intellect is covered or obscured. Jinn, then, are the hidden ones. That's the first correction. Before fire, before fear, before the folklore, before the family story begins with, I swear this actually happened, the Jinn are defined by concealment. They're not primarily monsters, they're hidden beings. And in Islamic thought, hidden definitely never means imaginary. This is one of the places where modern people struggle. I think we've been trained to treat visibility as a synonym for reality. If something can't be measured, filmed, scanned, tagged, monetized, and made available in a vertical video with subtitles, we tend to get nervous. We assume the problem is with the thing. Islam begins from a different premise. The Qur'an opens the world through al-ghaib, the unseen. Belief in the unseen is not an embarrassing leftover from some primitive religion. It's one of the first features of developing a religious imagination. The seen world is real, the body is real, hunger is real, rent is tragically real, but the seen world doesn't exhaust reality. So we find the Jinn inside a larger Islamic cosmology. Humans, angels, Jinn, animals, the visible world, the unseen world, the moral world, the world of matter, all of it is under Allah. If we don't start here, we immediately turn the Jinn into horror content. And horror content is usually bad theology with some good lighting. The Quran does give us a pretty precise map. Humans are made from clay, from earth, from the material heaviness of this world. Angels are described in hadith as created from light. Jinn are described as created from fire, from smokeless flame, from a scorching kind of fire. And unlike angels, the Jinn are morally accountable. They can obey or disobey. They can believe or reject. They can be righteous or corrupt. And they can also hear revelation and respond to it. This is probably why collapsing Jinn into demons is sloppy. Some Jinn are shayateen, devils, malignant tempters. Iblis is from the Jinn, but Jinn is the broader category. Shaitan is a moral and functional category, the one who rebels, tempts, misleads. You can have a shayateen from among the Jinn, and in Qur'anic language, even from among humans. Which I know it's extremely rude, but also observably true. I think we all know at least one human shaitan. Some of them are in my comment section. So the first framework is this. Jinn are a created order of hidden beings made from fire, morally accountable before God, normally unseen by humans, and capable of good or evil. Already, that's more interesting to me than genie. And already, we're building a world where the invisible has law. One of the most powerful Quranic scenes involving Jinn is not a haunting or possession or monster attack. It's a listening. In Surah Al-Kahf, the Quran describes a group of Jinn being directed toward the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to listen to the Quran. When they arrive, they tell each other to be quiet. They listen. Then they return to their people as warners. Think about that for a second. The first great image is not Jinn terrorizing humans. It's them encountering the revelation. They hear something, recognize it, and are moved by it. Surah al-Jinn opens with the same astonishment. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is told to say that it has been revealed to him that a group of Jinn listened and said, "We have heard a wondrous recitation. It guides to rightness, so we have believed in it." That's such a weird and beautiful scene, because the Qur'an is not treating the Jinn as props in a human story. They have their own communities, their own speech, their own moral recognition, and their own accountability. They hear the Qur'an and understand that something has entered the world that concerns them too. The Qur'an repeatedly pairs Jinn and human beings. I'll give you a few quotes. "I did not create Jinn and humankind except to worship me. O assembly of Jinn and humankind, if humans and Jinn gather together to produce the like of this Qur'an." These pairings are important. It doesn't make Jinn and humans identical, but it does mean that both are being addressed and summoned, and they both are inside the moral architecture of creation. And I think this is where Islam does something radical with older spirit belief. Before Islam, Jinn were already present in Arabian imagination. They were connected to deserts, poets, soothsayers, strange speech, madness, occulted knowledge, and dangerous places. The Khan, the soothsayer, was thought to receive occult information. The poet could be imagined as inspired by an unseen companion. And the desert wasn't considered empty. It was alive with presences. Islam doesn't show up and just delete all of that. It's more like a reorganization. The Qur'an affirms the Jinn as real, but it cuts them down to creaturehood. They don't control revelation or possess independent access to supreme knowledge. They aren't divine or semi-divine, and they're no longer allowed to sit in the margins of the universe, selling secret information to nervous humans. Surah al-Jinn includes the Jinn themselves saying that they used to sit in listening places, but now they find them guarded, and whoever tries to listen finds a flame waiting. The Qur'an is doing theology through a cosmic image. The old economy of soothsaying and stolen heavenly gossip is closed. And that's very important because human beings love the idea of secret knowledge. I mean, I know I do. We love thinking there's a hidden shortcut, a name, a ritual, a phrase, a sigil, a hack, some kind of forbidden contact, any metaphysical cheat code that lets us bypass humility. Islam, and I mean this with love, is very annoying about this. It keeps dragging everything back to worship. Even the Jinn, even fire-made beings, even the things that scare us. These aren't loopholes in Tawheed. They're evidence that Tawheed is bigger than our sensory world. The unseen is in no man's land. It belongs to the supreme power. Any episode about Jinn has to deal with Iblis. The Quran tells the story of Adam or Adam alayhi salam and the command to the angels to prostrate. They prostrate, except Iblis. In Surah Al-Kahf, the Quran says explicitly that Iblis was from the Jinn, and he rebelled against the command of his Lord. This verse is crucial. It means Iblis isn't just an angel who went bad in the Christianized pop culture sense. The Islamic discussion is much more complex, and classical scholars debated how to understand his presence among the angels, but the Quranic statement is clear. He was from the Jinn. The refusal of Iblis is also the first great spiritual psychology lesson in this subject. He never denies God's existence. That would almost be easier to understand. He knows God, he speaks to God, he recognizes divine command. His failure is something far beyond atheism. It's arrogance. He says in effect, I am better than him. You created me from fire, and you created him from clay. There it is, the first racism of substance. Fire looking at clay and saying, I am superior. It's essentially metaphysical classism, and it's still the same disease. Human beings do this constantly. We change categories, but the pattern remains. My tribe is better, my class is better, my nationality is better, my education is better, my suffering is more sophisticated, my spirituality is more elevated, my algorithm is cleaner, my podcast has more obscure references to Persian demonology. Okay, that last one was too specific. Iblis takes difference and turns it into hierarchy. And that's the spiritual danger. The jinn are made from fire. Humans are made from clay. Angels are made from light. None of that gives any created being the right to refuse God. So when people talk about jinn as if their material makes them automatically superior, automatically more powerful, automatically more glamorous, they're definitely missing the first lesson in the story. Fire can be arrogant. Clay can be honored. Light can obey. And every created being remains dependent. This is why Islam doesn't let us romanticize the jinn. It also doesn't let us demonize the whole category. Their element isn't really the issue. It's more about obedience and worship. The moral universe is much deeper than species, and I think that should make humans very nervous, because it means we can't blame everything on the invisible. The whisper is there, but the choice still belongs to us. Then there's Sulaiman alayhi salam, Solomon. If there's one part of Qur'anic jinn material that feels cinematic in the old epic sense, to me it's the story of Solomon's kingdom. The Qur'an describes Solomon as having authority, by Allah's permission, over winds, birds, animals, humans, and jinn. Some of the jinn work under him. They build, they dive, they make structures, statues, basins, and cauldrons. In the story of the Queen of Sheba, an Ifrit from among the jinn offers to bring her throne before Solomon rises from his place. This is the part where every spiritually irresponsible person, like me, suddenly gets interested. Because humans hear Solomon had authority over jinn and immediately think, okay, but where's the PDF? This is how we get occult nonsense, grimoire culture, spiritual arrogance, and people with bad sleep schedules trying to command unseen beings when they can't even command their own doom scrolling. The Qur'anic point isn't that jinn are available to ambitious weirdos with incense. Solomon's authority is exceptional and prophetic. It's given by Allah. It's not presented as a technique that the average person can copy. In fact, the Islamic tradition is deeply suspicious of attempts to manipulate the unseen, because the line between knowledge and delusion gets very dangerous very quickly. Solomon's story also humbles the jinn. When Solomon dies, the Qur'an says nothing indicated his death to the jinn except a creature of the earth eating away at his staff. When he falls, it becomes clear that if the jinn had known the unseen, they would have not remained in humiliating labor. That image is pretty incredible. The king dies standing. The jinn keep working. A small creature eats the staff. The body falls, and the illusion of hidden knowledge collapses. Again, the Quran is not saying the jinn are unreal. It's saying they're not God's type. And they don't own al-ghayb. They're not all-knowing. Their invisibility to us does not make them omniscient. I think this is one of the healthiest corrections in the entire tradition. The unseen is real, but it's not automatically wise. The unseen is populated, governed, and every intelligence, seen or unseen, remains firmly under Allah. I'm sweating because I know I'm going to get some angry DMs. But hey, I'm an idiot mystic. What do you expect? Now I'm going to try to move carefully from doctrine to folklore. This is where I need to keep my categories clean. The Qur'an and strong hadith gives us the foundation. Classical scholars interpret and debate. Folklore records the way communities experience, remember, exaggerate, and narrate the unseen in daily life. Folklore is definitely not worthless. It's kind of like a memory with dust on it. But it's important to remember folklore is not automatically doctrine. So when your auntie says, never pour hot water down the drain at night without saying Bismillah, we should not instantly treat that like a verse of the Qur'an. At the same time, we shouldn't smirk like modernity has made us immune to mystery. A lot of inherited practices are mixtures. Some Qur'anic instinct, some hadith-based etiquette, some local fear, some practical wisdom, and some grandma-level psychological warfare. And honestly, grandma-level psychological warfare is powerful. Across Muslim cultures, Jinn stories tend to gather around thresholds, much like other unseen beings. Old trees, wells, ruins, bathrooms, crossroads, water sources, the hours between day and night. Places where categories weaken. And this pattern, which I keep mentioning, is very important. Jinn are hidden beings, and hidden beings appear most often in hidden places. Places that are between uses. Places where humans don't feel fully at home. The abandoned house is not quite domestic and not quite wild. The graveyard isn't quite the city and not quite the next world. The bathroom is inside the home, but associated with impurity and exposure. The well is a hole into depth. Folklore is almost obsessed with thresholds because human beings are obsessed with thresholds. Birth, death, sleep, puberty, madness, prayer, nightfall. These are the moments when the ordinary self feels porous, and the Jinn often appear exactly there. In Muslim families, Jinn are not abstract theology. Usually, someone has a story. Someone's grandmother saw something. Someone's cousin moved into a house and then the children kept getting sick. Someone went to a shrine. Someone had dreams. Someone heard anklets in the hallway. Someone says a bride appeared near an old tree. Someone says the bathroom light flickered and nobody slept that night because apparently even the electrical grid participates in metaphysics. These stories are often frightening, but they also do social work. They teach boundaries. Do not go alone. Do not mock what you don't understand. Say Bismillah. Keep clean. Respect places. Respect the night. Respect the dead. Do not behave like the world is empty just because you are arrogant. The last one may be the deepest lesson. Jinn folklore trains people to not treat the world as spiritually vacant. The risk is that fear can become excessive. People can become superstitious, paranoid, or even cruel. They can blame illness on Jinn when someone needs medical care. They can blame women, children, the mentally ill, or the grieving. And the worst, they can turn spiritual language into social control. This is why discernment is so important. Still, I understand why these stories survive. A completely empty universe is unbearable, and a completely chaotic universe is also unbearable. The Islamic world is neither empty nor chaotic. It's populated and ordered. And this folklore is what happens when the belief touches houses, trees, marriages, and family gossip, which frankly is where most theology eventually has to prove itself, right? And now let's talk about protection, because when people hear Jinn, they usually want either stories or techniques, and Islam, again, refuses to be as dramatic as people want it to be. The strongest protective practices are ordinary acts of remembrance and obedience. Recitation, Ayatul Kursi, the last two surahs, Al-Falaq and An-Nas, saying Bismillah, closing doors at night while mentioning Allah's name, covering vessels, keeping cleanliness, seeking refuge before entering the bathroom, maintaining prayer, a spiritually ordered home. I know it's not very cinematic. There's no dramatic Latin chanting in a thunderstorm, no giant neon sword, No influencer selling a Jinn protection masterclass for $333. Although I shouldn't say that too loudly because someone will launch it by tomorrow morning. The prophetic model is much more grounded. Mention Allah's name. Do not leave thresholds spiritually unattended. Do not make your home a place where remembrance disappears. Do not live like the unseen is a playground. There are hadiths about Ayatul Kursi and protection from shaitan. There are hadiths about closing doors and covering vessels while mentioning Allah's name. There are hadiths about seeking refuge before entering places of impurity. There are reports about snakes and houses where the Prophet, peace be upon him, commanded caution rather than instant violence, because some jinn may take forms associated with snakes. There are narrations about bones and dung being provisioned for jinn, which is a strange detail, but also a reminder that the unseen world is not merely symbolic in the tradition. Of course, with jinn stuff, I have to be extra careful. Some material is strong. Some is debated. Some later lore gets very elaborate. The farther we get from the Qur'an and sound hadiths, the more cautious we should become. But the practical ethos is clear. You're not being paranoid when you're looking for protection. You're remembering. Islamic spirituality does not encourage people to obsess over jinn. It encourages people to orient themselves toward Allah. That distinction is everything, because if you spend your life terrified of jinn, thinking about jinn, watching jinn videos like this one, diagnosing jinn in every mood swing and shadow, the jinn have already taken up space in your mind, whether or not anything supernatural is happening. And fear can become a form of worship if you feed it enough attention. Islam doesn't ask us to deny danger, it just asks us to put it in its proper place. Allah is greater. Say Bismillah, read Ayatul Kursi, keep your house clean, pray. Don't go looking for trouble in abandoned places because you watched one podcast episode with a masked man talking about fire beings. I'm specifically asking you to become more normal after this episode. A rare request from this show. Now we arrive at one of the most fascinating parts of the subject, the qareen. In the Qur'an, qareen means companion, close associate, or something or someone paired with you. In the Qur'an, the word appears in different contexts, and one important verse speaks of the one who turns away from the remembrance of the Most Merciful being assigned a shaitan who becomes a companion. In hadith, the idea becomes more personal. Every human being has an accompanying presence from among the jinn, often described as a qareen. When the companions ask whether even the Prophet has one, he says yes, but Allah helped him against it, and it only commands him to good. Interpretations of this wording vary, but the broad idea is established in Islamic discourse. The human being is accompanied. I know I'm not yelling, but this is psychologically explosive and spiritually dangerous if handled badly, so I think slowing down is a good idea. The qareen shouldn't become a lazy explanation for every thought we dislike. You were rude to your wife? My qareen did it. You ate 7 pastries at 2 a.m.? My qareen has a sweet tooth. You opened Instagram for 1 second and lost 45 minutes doom scrolling? My qareen has a dopamine addiction. No. Islam doesn't use the unseen to erase responsibility. As I said before, while the whisper is real, the choice remains yours. But the qareen opens up a really interesting question. What if human interior is not as sealed as modern individualism imagines? Modern people, including Muslims, often picture the mind like a private apartment. Thoughts happen inside it. Desires happen inside it. Temptations happen inside it. Everything is mine, even when I hate it. My anxiety, my intrusive thought, my impulse, my shame, my fantasy, my self-sabotage. I found that Islamic language is more relational. There's nafs, the self with its appetites and distortions. There's waswas, whispering. There are shayateen, there are angels. There's the heart, remembrance, heedlessness, and of course, companionship. The inner life is not just a sealed room. It's something between a battlefield, a receiving station, and a house with doors. The qareen belongs to that world of in-betweenness and not being entirely alone in your own head. And for me, this is where a comparison becomes very tempting. Socrates spoke of the daimonion, an inner divine sign or warning presence. Christian tradition has guardian angels and demons. Jungian psychology has shadow figures, autonomous complexes, dream characters, and inner others. Modern clinical language speaks of intrusive thoughts, dissociation, parts, internalized voices, trauma imprints, and self-states. Contemporary spiritual culture talks about guides, attachments, energies, and entities. The Islamic qareen is not identical to any of these. So much like the other entities I've been talking about, we shouldn't flatten the differences. I just want to point out the family resemblance again, because it's worth noting. Across cultures, human beings keep describing the self as accompanied. There's something warning, tempting, repeating old wounds in a new voice, knowing where we are weak. There's something pushing us toward humiliation right when we are about to grow. Something tells you, don't pray now, later. Something tells you, send the text. Something tells you, you're unforgivable. Sometimes something tells you, you're special and rules are for smaller souls. That last one is especially dangerous because it sounds spiritual, and I've heard it before. One of the strangest things about human beings is how often our worst impulses arrive disguised as insight. The qareen give us language for accompaniment, but Islamic discipline gives us a way not to become obsessed with it. You don't have to identify every whisper, you just have to go back to Allah. There's no need to become some kind of detective of invisible influence every time you start feeling a little dark. You need to build a life where remembrance is stronger than suggestion. And still, I think the qareen is one of the most haunting ideas in Islamic anthropology, because it says the self is intimate, but definitely not solitary. You're responsible, but also influenced. You're alone with your choices, but you're not alone in the room. To understand why the jinn matter historically, I think we need to go back before Islam. Pre-Islamic Arabian culture already had a powerful sense of jinn as unseen presences connected to deserts, wild places, inspiration, madness, and speech. Poets were not understood merely as talented individuals with strong personal brands. Poetry could be felt as something received or carried by an unseen force. Poet might have a jinn companion. The qareen, the soothsayer, might speak in rhymed prose, obscured utterance, or inspired language that seemed to come from beyond ordinary consciousness. This is one reason accusations against Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, often involved poetry, madness, or possession. His opponents weren't modern skeptics saying, "Please submit your claim to a peer-reviewed journal." They lived in this world where inspired speech was already a category. They could hear the power and truth of the Qur'an, but they tried to classify it using existing boxes. Poet, soothsayer, possessed man, magician. The Qur'an rejects those labels. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was not a poet overtaken by a jinn. Astaghfirullah. He is not a kahin, receiving scraps of stolen unseen information. Astaghfirullah. The Qur'an is revelation from Allah. So Islam does something pretty precise. It doesn't deny that there are unseen intelligences. It just denies that they have anything to do with explaining revelation. It doesn't deny that the jinn can interact with human perception, but it clearly denies them authority over divine truth. This is important for artists too, because anyone who has made art seriously knows that inspiration does not always feel self-generated. A line arrives, an image appears, a melody finds you. A phrase comes from somewhere below or above the normal self. Ancient cultures often explain that through spirits, daimons, muses, jinn, gods, ancestors, or madness. Modern culture tries to explain it through the unconscious, pattern recognition, default mode networks, dissociation, creative incubation, and everyone's favorite, flow states. These explanations might actually be describing different layers of the same mystery. As a meditation teacher, clinical psychologist, and a person who makes things, I don't think every inspired thought is an entity. Oh my God, that would be exhausting. Imagine trying to footnote every sentence with possible jinn involvement. But I also think modern people have kind of destroyed inspiration. We act like creativity is just the brain producing novelty in a meat computer. That may be one level of description, but it doesn't capture the lived feeling of being seized by meaning. The older world knew that language can feel inhabited. I think Islam protects that intuition while purifying it. The Qur'an isn't Jinn speech. The poet is not automatically holy because he feels inspired. The weirdness of inspiration is real, but you still need to discern the source. That's a much more mature worldview than both cynicism and gullibility. Cynicism says nothing is coming through. Gullibility says everything coming through is sacred. From my limited understanding, Islam says, test the source, remember God, and do not mistake intensity for truth. Every artist should tattoo that somewhere. I think everyone should tattoo that somewhere invisible. Or wait, that might be haram. Never mind. I'm gonna stop talking. Now I guess we have to talk about possession, mental health, and places where spiritual belief and suffering end up meeting. This part needs care. In many Muslim communities, jinn are part of how people explain distress. Someone hears voices, someone has seizures, someone becomes withdrawn, someone feels watched, someone feels like they can't pray, someone starts having these terrifying episodes at night where they can't move. Even if someone falls into addiction or sexual compulsion, families may explain this through jinn, black magic, evil eye, trauma, grief, punishment, weakness of faith, or some mixture of all of the above. Trust me, I've been explained these ways many times. Modern clinicians often get uncomfortable here. Some dismiss the whole thing as superstition. Some overcorrect and become so culturally sensitive that they stop doing actual clinical assessment. Both of these mistakes can hurt people. A person who believes they're afflicted by jinn should not be mocked. Mockery closes the door and increases shame. It makes people hide symptoms and turns therapy into another colonial room where the patient is silently told, "Your grandmother's language for suffering is stupid." That is not healing. At the same time, not every frightening experience is possession. Sleep paralysis has neurological explanations. Trauma can make the body feel invaded. OCD can produce intrusive, blasphemous thoughts that horrify the sufferer precisely because they care about God. Psychosis can involve voices or beliefs that feel spiritually charged. Dissociation can make parts of the self feel alien. Grief can make the dead feel near. And addiction can feel like another will living inside of you. None of that means the spiritual world is fake. It means that we are layered. A Muslim approach to care should be able to hold more than one layer at a time. At least I think so. Someone might need ruqya and therapy. Someone may need prayer and medication. Someone may need Qur'an recitation and some good sleep. Another person might need a scholar and a psychiatrist. Someone might need to stop watching possession videos at 3 a.m. because the algorithm has become their qareen, just with a ring light. I'm not joking. Fear-based content can train the nervous system to interpret every sensation as supernatural threat. A tight chest becomes attack. A nightmare becomes evidence. A random thought becomes possession. A normal sexual impulse becomes proof of corruption. And once fear becomes the interpretive frame, the world fills with signs. That's why discernment is mercy. Islamic spirituality should not make people more terrified of being alive. It's supposed to orient you better. If someone is in danger, hearing commands to harm themselves or others, losing touch with reality, unable to sleep for days, or suffering intensely, they need immediate human help. That can include religious support, but it should also include qualified medical or mental health care. There's no betrayal of faith in seeking treatment. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught spiritual protection. He also lived in a world where medicine, care, and practical action mattered. The unseen does exist. The brain also exists. The nervous system also exists. Trauma exists. Loneliness exists. And sometimes people reach for Jinn language because it gives form to suffering that would otherwise be unbearable. A compassionate society should ask, what is this person experiencing? What do they believe it means? What helps them feel safe? What risks are present? And what forms of care can work together without humiliating them? That's the mature path that refuses mockery and lazy reduction. It says, we'll take your words seriously, and we'll take your suffering seriously too. That, to me, is where Islamic psychology can become beautiful. Not by turning every symptom into a Jinn, or by turning every Jinn story into a symptom. By remembering that the human being is body, mind, soul, and creature before God. You're alive. You're alive, and everything you feel is important. I've talked about this a lot the last few episodes, but I think there's one modern experience that deserves its own section: sleep paralysis. Because if you ask enough people from enough cultures, you will hear the same basic story, just wearing different clothes. A person wakes up, they can't move, they feel pressure on the chest, and they sense a presence in the room. Sometimes they see a figure, sometimes they hear footsteps, sometimes they feel something sitting on them. Modern science can describe the mechanism. The body remains in the paralysis of REM sleep while consciousness partially wakes. The dream state bleeds into waking perception. Fear spikes, and the brain tries to explain the threat. That explanation is definitely useful and can calm people and reduce panic. It can even help with sleep hygiene. But across cultures, people have interpreted sleep paralysis through local spirit categories. The old hag, the nightmare, Karabasan, Jinn, demons, ghosts, witches, alien visitors, shadow people. This should interest us because the raw human experience seems consistent, but the interpretation changes with culture. In Muslim contexts, the presence may be interpreted as Jinn. In Turkey, it may be called Karabasan. In Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Morocco, and elsewhere, Jinn language may be part of the explanation. A purely skeptical person thinks it's just the brain, and a purely supernatural person thinks the brain is just modern arrogance. I think the more interesting question is, why does the threshold between sleep and waking so often produce the feeling of an intelligent presence? Why does the mind, when caught between worlds, populate the room? Why do we experience fear as a visitor? Maybe sleep paralysis is neurological. Maybe sometimes spiritual realities interact with vulnerable states. I'm not making a claim beyond what I can responsibly say. But I do think the experience teaches us something about thresholds. There are a lot of them: sleep, dream, night. The bed is intimate and helpless. The body is present but unavailable. And into that helplessness, culture pours this face. For a Muslim, the practical answer is still not obsession. Sleep with wudu if you can, recite what is recommended, remember Allah, reduce fear-based content, take care of your sleep, seek help if it is frequent or traumatic, and do not let the night visitor become the center of your religion. The center is Allah, even in the dark, especially in the dark. This episode is part of a larger Hidden Beings series. We've been moving through the strange neighbors of human imagination. Mothman, the modern omen, fairies and hidden people, the old neighbors under hills, daimons, the intermediary intelligences, Shaitim and Christian demons who belong to nearby Abrahamic spirit maps, each with their own theology and history. And now the Jinn, the Islamic category of unseen intelligences, created from fire, morally accountable, addressed by revelation, and feared in folklore. The temptation is to say, maybe these are all the same thing. And trust me, I get it, because I always want to say that. But it's just too easy. I think the better phrase is family resemblance, like I've said like 7 times already. Across cultures, these hidden beings tend to share patterns. They live near thresholds. They appear in dreams, wilderness, and altered states. They can inspire, tempt, imitate, seduce, and punish. They're often offended by disrespect. Sometimes they're connected to specific places, and they don't really appear in any fixed kind of way. Lights, animals, strangers, voices. They seem to continue to blur the line between inner and outer experience. They make us ask ourselves, did this happen in the world, in the mind, or in some third zone we don't know how to name? And again, many researchers, including Jacques Vallée, sorry I mentioned him one more time, not again, argue that modern entity encounters echo older folklore. Fairies, demons, angels, and visitors from elsewhere. I'm not saying UFO beings are secretly fairies or fairies are secretly Jinn, or that everything weird is just God's marketing department being great at branding. Please don't turn this into a conspiracy chart. There's another video for that. The point is that human encounters with the other seem to repeat certain patterns. The form changes, but the structure stays the same. A long time ago, the visitor would come from a hill. Then they came from the desert. Then from the heavens. Then from another dimension. The modern phrase non-human intelligence is interesting because it's so sterile. It feels like language created by a committee that was afraid of both angels and aliens. But it does name something important: intelligence beyond the human. Islam already has a category for some of that. Jinn are non-human intelligences, but that doesn't mean every NHI report is Jinn. It means Muslims do not have to begin from the assumption that human beings are the only created intelligences with moral agency. That's a major difference. The secular world encounters the possibility of non-human intelligence and panics philosophically. Are we alone? What is consciousness? What happens to religion? What happens to human uniqueness? Islam says that human beings were never alone in that sense. Angels exist, jinn exist, animals praise in ways we do not comprehend. The universe is already full. Human uniqueness does not require some kind of cosmic emptiness. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the Islamic worldview. It doesn't need the universe to be spiritually vacant in order for us to matter. We matter because Allah gives us meaning, not because we were the only minds in the building. And I guess, since we're talking about Jinn, we should probably spend a moment on the genie, because for many Western audiences, Jinn means lamp, wishes, smoke, gold cuffs, and someone yelling phenomenal cosmic power with jazz hands. Rest in peace, Robin Williams. That image comes through a long history of translation, adaptation, Orientalist fantasy, the 1001 Nights, European fascination with the exotic East, stage magic, children's literature, and eventually Disney. I have affection for some of it. I'm not here to spiritually cancel the blue man in a lamp, but the genie is what happens when a morally complex, unseen being becomes entertainment technology. The lamp genie is useful because he gives you what you want, but the Qur'anic Jinn are important because they force you to ask what you are. Those are very different functions. The genie story is about desire. What would you wish for? Power, money, love, more wishes maybe? Because apparently humans immediately become lawyers when we're given miracles. The Islamic Jinn discourse is not wish fulfillment, but rather a test of humility. It asks whether you can believe in unseen beings without worshipping them, fearing them excessively, seeking power through them, or turning them into entertainment. We see that modern horror makes a different mistake. It takes the Jinn and turns them into pure evil atmosphere. Cracked walls, possession, smoke, children drawing creepy circles. Turkish horror has practically built an entire industrial zone out of this. Some of it's effective and culturally interesting, but some of it is just people screaming Jinn while the camera shakes. Horror can reveal real anxieties. In films like Under the Shadow, the Jinn becomes connected to war, domestic fear, motherhood, and repression. In other stories, Jinn carry anxieties about sexuality, family honor, religion, and of course, occulted knowledge. That's worth studying. But horror also trains us to confuse fear with depth. The Jinn are not more real because the soundtrack is louder. The older Islamic frame is quieter and more unsettling. They're here. They're hidden. They're accountable. But they don't own the unseen. They remember Allah. That is a much better story, and a much harder one to sell as a jump scare. And I want to bring this closer to home for a minute. In Pakistan, and in a lot of South Asian Muslim contexts, Jinn are a part of domestic life. People talk about them in relation to houses, old bungalows, water tanks, staircases, villages, marriages, women being distressed, men behaving weirdly and somehow still not going to therapy because apparently the Jinn have better healthcare access than we do. Jinn stories often live where the family cannot say the real thing directly. A woman is depressed in a suffocating marriage, a child is traumatized, a teenager is anxious, a man is addicted, a family is abusive, a person is grieving. Instead of saying all that, people say, there's something in this house. Sometimes maybe they're right in a way we can't measure. Sometimes the something is the family system itself. Sometimes the Jinn story becomes the only socially acceptable way to admit that the atmosphere is poisoned. That's what makes this subject so delicate. Jinn belief can protect people from arrogance and spiritual emptiness, but it can also hide human responsibility. If a house is full of cruelty and everyone blames Jinn, the Jinn becomes a convenient landlord for human sin. But if a clinician walks into that same house and says, there are no Jinn and you're all being irrational, that clinician may destroy trust before healing even gets a chance to begin. I think the best approach would be layered. Ask what happened, who's suffering, what the family believes, what care is needed, and ask whether the haunting began after a death, a move, a betrayal, a trauma, or even an illness. Haunting is not always supernatural. but it's almost always meaningful, and meaning deserves respect. In Pakistani culture, we also need to be honest about how Jinn language can be used against vulnerable people, especially women and people with mental illness. Possession accusations can become control. Spiritual leaders can exploit families. Shame can prevent treatment. People can be dragged from one guru to another, while depression, epilepsy, schizophrenia, OCD, or domestic violence go completely untreated. That's just abuse and negligence wearing religious perfume. A truly Islamic approach should be more than just that. It should honor revelation, respect the unseen, and protect the vulnerable at all costs. If your Jinn theory makes you less compassionate, something has definitely gone wrong. If your skepticism makes you arrogant towards suffering people, something has also gone wrong. We need a third path, a path of serious faith and serious care. No mockery, no panic, no exploitation. I do find that people are always fascinated by contact. Can humans contact Jinn? Can Jinn contact humans? Can they marry humans? Can they possess people? Can they teach hidden knowledge? Can they move objects? Can they become animals? Can they appear as humans? Can they like your Instagram story? I made that last one up, but honestly, at this point in the history of brain rot, who knows? Classical Islamic discussions include many reports and debates about Jinn-human interaction. Some scholars allowed that Jinn can appear in forms, influence humans, or even possess people. Others were cautious about exaggerations. The tradition contained stories of Muslim Jinn, harmful Jinn, Jinn in animal forms, Jinn listening to Qur'an, Jinn interacting with prophets and saints, and people claiming contact. But the ethical center always remains clear. Do not seek unlawful contact. Do not use Jinn. Do not bargain with the unseen. Do not pursue magic. Do not treat hidden beings as a source of power. Do not confuse spiritual curiosity with permission. This is a major difference between Islamic spirituality and occult spirituality. A lot of modern occult culture treats contact as inherently valuable. Even I did for most of my life. If something is hidden, contact it. If something is powerful, learn from it. If something is forbidden, maybe that means it's advanced. If something scares you, integrate it. If something whispers, make a podcast about it. Again, I'm talking to myself too. Islam is not impressed by contact for contact's sake. The question isn't, can you reach the unseen? The question is, what is the source? What is the cost? What is the law? And does this bring you closer to Allah or closer to self-importance? A lot of people want supernatural experiences because normal obedience feels too boring. But boredom is often where sincerity begins. It's much easier to chase entities than fix your character. It's much easier to research Jinn kings than to apologize. It's much easier to talk about portals than to pray Fajr. It's much easier to blame a whisper than to stop feeding the part of you that enjoys being misled. This is why the Jinn are spiritually useful, even when we don't experience anything dramatic. They show us our appetite for hidden power, and then Allah, through Islam, asks us to surrender that appetite. At the deepest level, the Jinn force us to ask what kind of universe we think we live in. The modern secular imagination often gives us a lonely universe. Matter is mostly empty space. Consciousness is an accident or an emergent property. Meaning is some kind of story we project. The stars are silent, the dead are gone, the mind is private, and the self is alone. God, if discussed at all, becomes a vague symbol of comfort or an outdated hypothesis. And then people wonder why they're depressed while living inside a metaphysical storage unit. Islam gives us a very different picture. The cosmos is alive with worship. The seen world is a sign. The unseen is real. Angels record and Jinn choose. Humans are tested and animals praise. The heart can remember or harden. The tongue can bless or destroy. The night can be frightening, but it isn't outside God. This is a disciplined, enchanted worldview, as childish as it may sound. And that might just be what modern people are starving for. Not superstition or gullibility, not pretending every shadow has a name, but a sense that reality is deeper than surfaces, that more life matters and unseen influence exists, that we aren't sealed machines and that intelligence is not limited to human bodies, that the world is neither empty nor ours to dominate. This should humble us, and maybe that's why Jinn stories endure, because they humble the human eye. They remind us we don't see everything. They humble the human mind. They remind us we don't know everything. They humble the human ego, because they tell us we aren't the only intelligence here. They tell us Allah is greater than what we fear, and humble our skepticism. They tell us our disbelief is not a wall around reality. That's a powerful set of corrections. I think part of why this episode matters to me is that I grew up with Jinn as both belief and atmosphere. Not always in a dramatic way, sometimes just as a tone in the place I was. A lowered voice, a warning, a joke that wasn't fully a joke. A story told by someone who seemed too serious for it to be pure entertainment. That's the thing about Muslim Jinn stories. They often arrive with a strange confidence. The person telling you does not seem to be trying to convince you. They're just reporting a fact from the family archive. And when you grow up, you can become skeptical of the details. Maybe you should. Families exaggerate, memory mutates, fear edits footage, culture supplies costumes, but something does remain. Not necessarily the claim that every story happened exactly as told, but something deeper. A sense that a house has more than walls, that night has more than darkness, that thoughts have more than chemistry, that language can protect, and that the unseen is not empty. I don't want to become gullible, but I also don't want to become spiritually sterile. That balance is hard. It's much easier to pick a side and become annoying. The rationalist becomes annoying by explaining away every mystery before it has a chance to teach humility. The occultist becomes annoying by turning every coincidence into a DM from God. The religious fearmonger becomes annoying by making people terrified of their own homes. The influencer becomes annoying by turning all of it into content with a thumbnail face. And then there's the path I'm trying to walk here, badly but sincerely. Take revelation seriously. Take scholarship seriously. Take folklore seriously as folklore. Take psychology seriously. Take suffering seriously. And take Allah more seriously than everything else. That's the only way this topic doesn't become either cringe or just cruelty. So what are the Jinn? In Islam, they're hidden beings created from fire, morally accountable before Allah, capable of belief and unbelief, normally unseen by humans, present in the Qur'an, elaborated in hadith and scholarship, and surrounded by centuries of folklore. Historically, they carry traces of pre-Islamic Arabian ideas about deserts, poets, inspiration, and unseen speech, but Islam restructures those ideas under revelation and tawhid. Culturally, they live in stories about ruins, liminal spaces, possession, and family memory. Psychologically, they force us to think carefully about inner life, temptation, trauma, and the fear of being accompanied, and the feeling of being accompanied. Comparatively, they resemble other hidden being traditions that I've been talking about without becoming identical to them. Fairies, daimons, demons, shiddim, spirits, and modern NHI all echo certain patterns, but the Jinn do have their own Islamic ontology. Spiritually, they remind us that unseen intelligence exists, but hiddenness is not holy. Power is not divinity, strangeness is not truth, fear isn't worship, and curiosity is definitely not permission. The Jinn are not there to make Islam spooky. They're there because reality is larger than the visible. And if reality is larger than the visible, then humility isn't optional. That's the real ending of this episode. Humility. You do not see everything. You do not know everything. You are not free from influence. And you are never outside the authority of Allah. That last part is mercy, because a crowded cosmos without God would be terrifying. A crowded cosmos under Allah is still frightening, but it isn't meaningless. It has order, law, protection. It has your turn. So say Bismillah. Keep your house clean. Don't mock what you don't understand. And if the interior life is more populated than modern people want to admit, then maybe the old advice still stands. Watch your companions, the visible ones, the invisible ones, and the ones you keep becoming in secret. This is the Idiot Mystic. May Allah protect us from what we see, what we do not see, what we understand, what we misunderstand, and what we invite in when we're too arrogant to remember.